Hey, everybody. Welcome to another webinar. This is for the Intelligent App Chronicles for Healthcare. Thank you, everybody, for coming on. Yes, so we are running into a little bit of technical difficulties today. It's just one of those days. So sorry we are a couple minutes late. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off while we are waiting for one of our presenters to get in. And so again, everybody, thank you for joining. Today, we have a really great session planned for you. Really all around Gen AI and how do you unlock the value that generative AI can bring your organization and how can we help you accelerate that? So we've worked with one of our partners from InCycle. Chris and Alex are going to be joining us here in just a few minutes to kind of facilitate this conversation today and hope you can all get some really great value. So while as we're kicking off, I do want to just do a couple of housekeeping items and remind you this is a regular Teams meeting, but we do have some of the moderator controls enabled. So if you're an attendee, you're going to be automatically muted with your video off. But if you raise your hand or please use the chat to ask questions, but towards the end, if you raise your hand, we can take you off mute and you can talk to us live. We always record these. These are being recorded and we will post the recording in the deck after the session at our blog. You can see we have a short link here, aka.ms/app series. And so that's where you can find all of this great content afterwards. So let's all do some participation. Please use the chat, practice. Let us know where you're joining from. I am joining from Texas. Also, let's practice using the reactions. This is a one-to-many conversation, and so using those reactions like thumbs up and hearts and clapping really gives our presenters the encouragement that their content is hitting the mark. So awesome. I'm in Houston too. I see we got one in Houston, Texas also. All right, so normally I would say on to the presentation, but let me just double check. Are our presenters in the meeting?
I am. Can you all hear me?
Chris,
hear you,
yes,
yes.
we
All right.
can.
That's good. We're still working on Alex as well. I'll keep troubleshooting that in the background.
All righty.
All right, well, Chris, we're so glad that you've joined us. So please go ahead and take it away.
Sure. Let me share here. All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. Alex will be joining us shortly. Just for background, I'm Chris Liebelt. I'm a Director of Professional Services at InCycle Software. We already managed a Microsoft partner, been around for about 20 years. A lot of what we've been doing lately has to do with GenAI, as most folks are. And so kind of the point today is to kind of take you through kind of a journey and how we're using GenAI to improve a number of different things, as well as how we're doing it. And kind of, I'll kind of give you the spoiler here. Really what we want to do is understand how GenAI can be effectively rolled out and really get us past the point of proof of concept and more into being operational. And so we get more value then out of the work. And so, a couple things we'll go over today, just kind of, just some overview on the power of GenAI and some use cases in healthcare and life sciences, just from a high level. Really what we're going to focus on is the implementation hurdles and how we use platform engineering for a successful AI adoption. And that will become more clear as we go on here. And then we'll do a little bit of a QA session at the end if we have some time, and then kind of go over some next steps. So with that said, let's jump right in. So as we all know, GenAI is a game changer. This is a cultural change in every industry right now, some industries more than others. And what I really like to focus on here is the 80% number. This one is kind of shocking in that, within the next couple of years, I mean, we're already well into 2024 here, and we're talking about how 80% of enterprises are going to be using generative AI here in the next couple of years, up from 3% last year. The growth at which this is happening is disruptive. and quite amazing, to be honest with you. There's Alex, we'll let him in. And so, couple things to point out here is, given the time frame is so small, we all need to move very fast, but it's important that we're doing so in an efficient and governed manner. So we're not just getting stuck in proof of concepts. We're actually getting into operational workloads and delivering value to the organization, whether it be through efficiencies, productivity, innovation, and whatnot. And so, really what we're going to do in this presentation is show you how to achieve that with some secret sauce we have and with some best practices. So kind of some use cases. I mean, we all see all these things on the news here. We read about stuff about, what all the great things AI is doing, and GenAI in particular. We've all kind of been in the situation where, we're in the patient onboarding piece of this, and we're, sorting through mountains of paperwork to either join a new, a medical practice or a hospital, whatnot. But more importantly, kind of the reality of what GenAI is doing to improve outcomes and processes within healthcare and life sciences is, it's now being used to better diagnose cancer and treat cancer. It's giving personalized medicine to folks, and really customizing treatments based on their genetic profile and such. So we're really starting to see this as being a true productivity generator in medicine and healthcare, and enabling doctors and caregivers to focus more on what's more important in their day-to-day. So that said, there is quite a few challenges in getting into generative AI. What I like to always point out first on the top of the list here is, the state of the data and the data fabric for the organization is typically quite disjointed. And so that's something that we can really focus on correcting and getting to where all this data, whether it be unstructured or structured, is useful. Going from there, we get into more of a process and, I call it governance and security type of a mentality here, where, we want to make sure we're doing this correctly, because going down the wrong path and having to go circle back and do these things over and over again is just going to delay us. So we just saw how we have such a short window here to be competitive. Is how do we come out with our best foot forward right away, and make sure that we're setting the organization up for success. So with that said, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Alex Turner, who's going to take us through a bit of a journey on how we're using platform engineering and other best practices to roll out generative AI at scale. Alex?
All right, appreciate that, Chris. Thank you all for joining. Appreciate you taking the time today. As Chris mentioned, obviously GenAI is making a very large impact within the industry. Lots of our customers are coming to us and asking how can we help them successfully adopt GenAI within their organization. And so we've taken a very pragmatic approach. Obviously the things that I'm going to share with you today are the approach that we take. Hopefully you can mine some nuggets of gold out of that. But this is really the path that we take our customers through when they come to us and they start asking us about GenAI adoption within the organization. So I'm going to cover kind of the 5 pillars that we have here on the screen to start out with. We will dig into each one of these in a little bit more detail as we go through it. I am going to show you these steps as far as our IP is concerned, as far as our platform is concerned. But keep in mind, the pieces that are there and the pieces that we are going to talk about is the same path, is the same process that you're going to want to go through internally, whether you choose to do that with InCycle or not. So some key requirements here. One of the things we see is really just use case identification and prioritization. So there are lots of use cases out there for GenAI. One of the very first things that we need to do is understand which use cases are applicable for our business and then begin to prioritize those. Subsequent to that, we want to be able to evaluate those use cases, not only from more of a generic, hey, this is the category of use case type scenario that I have, but how do I dig into some details on what that implementation would look like, what that exact use case would look like within my organization, right? I could have something like a use case for a virtual assistant, and I can have two very differing implementations of that virtual assistant within my organization. We want to evaluate that against technical and both the business value. Once you've been able to determine that, think about the easiest path forward, the golden path forward. A lot of times, we hear a lot about platform engineering these days. Platform engineering fits into this. What are my patterns and practices from a implementation, from a DevOps perspective? Enablement and support, you'll want to think about, what is the knowledge acquisition scenarios for your team? Where do you need skilling? Where do you need experience? How can you get the training and the coaching, the mentoring to really empower and enable your teams? And then kind of the last piece that we'll talk about today is really about the value monitoring, right? So all of these things that we're doing prior to, once that gets into production, is the vision that we had what we're getting out from a value monitoring perspective, right? Am I meeting the goals that I wanted? Did I do the timeline that I want? Is the business opportunity there for what I expected, so that you can go back and really iterate on these GenAI use cases to get them valuable for your organization? So we'll dig into each one of these in a little bit more detail. Once again, I'll show you what that looks like from our platform perspective. So we've actually built a portal or a platform to help us go through this with our customers. Key takeaways are here is that you really want to have a standardized life cycle for your Gen AI within the organization. So you think about the standard life cycles that you have for applications. You want to establish that for Gen AI, and specifically for Gen AI, because there are pieces and parts that will or may be different from a Gen AI perspective than there are going to be from a normal kind of application lifecycle perspective, right? You want to have that in place so that you can really accelerate and break down the hurdles between that ideation to implementation timeline, right? All of the design, all of the data that you want to gather, you want those all standardized. So as you're going through and you're comparing Gen AI use cases, implementations within the organization, you can really be comparing apples to apples. The goal here is to get beyond that POC. We see lots of clients, they're doing a little bit more of kind of a John Wayne approach to it, where they may have multiple Gen AI initiatives going on within the organization. They may have multiple Gen AI initiatives within differing business units. And a lot of them tend to get stifled or tend to get slowed down at that POC stage, because they're not going to lay this foundation that we're talking about here today. So we obviously want to get past the POC stage, and we want to be able to drive that value for the business, right? Nothing sitting in dev is going to drive a lot of value for the business. And so one of the first steps in that is just taking a look at the landscape of use cases for AI or generative AI within your organization. This is going to vary between verticals. So when you think about healthcare or finance or maybe government, right? There are use cases out there generically that we can bring to the table and say, oh, well, yes, a virtual assistant or this or that. And so one of the things you need to do first is really say, okay, out of 150 use cases that you can find pretty easily for Gen AI type scenarios, how do those apply to me? How do I contextualize and begin to filter those use cases that are going to be specific? So you think about things like, what are the business drivers for the organization? What vertical am I in? Maybe we have some specific themes that we want to address so that we can get that number of, 100, 150 use cases generically for Gen AI down to ones that are really going to be important for the business. And so we go through this process with our customers. When you think about business drivers, are you focused on net new offerings? Or maybe it's an AI augmentation of an existing offering. Maybe there is a goal from a business driver perspective to open up a new market, be first to market, those types of things, right? And so you need to establish what are going to be your filters in order to come up with this list. Maybe it's your industry particular, right? So healthcare. There may be use cases in healthcare that do not exist within the government or the financial services realm, or in the financial services realm that don't necessarily apply to healthcare services. So the vertical that you're in is going to help you filter that list a little bit more. And then kind of what is your goal or what is your theme, at least your initial theme around adopting and implementing generative AI within your organization? Am I focused more kind of external facing, wanting to improve my customer experiences? Or am I really more focused on some internal things, right? Improvement to my processes internally, innovation as a whole within the organization. And so using these kind of three buckets of drivers, vertical, and themes, you can get this broad set of Gen AI use cases really down to a set that you can begin to prioritize those, right? You need to identify them. You need to socialize them within your organization. They need to be very contextualized for your industry or for your organization. And we found the best way to do that is through the industry you're in, kind of the theme of what you're trying to accomplish, and then the business drivers themselves. And so we'll actually start with the whole list of use cases that we have, and based upon the data and the responses we have, we filter those. What you're looking to do is begin to understand for your context the Gen AI use cases that are going to drive the most value and are going to have a relative time to market. So yes, I want to drive lots of value, but if it takes me 3 years to get there, that's probably not going to be the first one that I want to attack. But if I go something and I say, well, that has pretty good ROI and it's a pretty quick time to value, there is going to be a benefit in kind of grabbing that low-hanging fruit and getting your team and your organization experience in creating Gen AI or implementing Gen AI as part of an existing use case. Things to keep in mind, Gen AI is wonderful as it is, AI is wonderful it is. It's not the end all of everything, right? So you need to be careful. And one of the questions you need to ask is, okay, for this use case, for this app, for this implementation, does it make sense to implement Gen AI within that workload in and of itself? And quite frankly, in most cases, it does make sense, but you do need to balance that implementation in an existing workload against the value that it's going to derive for the business. Once you have all of that data, you really want to be able to prioritize. So we prioritize against business value and then the technical implementation. So does it have a really high value and can I implement it very quickly, right? The takeaway here is you need to define what that criteria is for your organization. There needs to be technical criteria, platform choices, skilling choices, those types of things, and business considerations. Business considerations are one of the things, and we'll touch on it a little bit deeper here, is where we see, I'm going to do this, excuse me, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get these cost savings. Well, cost savings, as good as it is very rarely the largest part of the business consideration. And so when you start thinking about defining your criteria and coming up with your list so that you can standardize it and have it across all of your workloads, you want to make sure that business as part of that. Part of that is ensuring that that business case is standardized. Once again, right, apples to apples as we evaluate these workloads. Um, I talked about the fact that yes, cost savings is great, but what about the business opportunity? You need to define what the business opportunity data points are for your context. So, what do I mean by that? Well, maybe the focus of the organization is net new customers, right? And so you can put a quantifiable value on every net new customer. That needs to be part of the business case for every Gen AI use case that you're thinking about. Maybe it is new markets. So, in addition to customers, maybe it's the fact that I can go into a new market. Maybe I can move from mid market to high market, right, as far as my customers are concerned. It may be revenue that is the priority for the organization. So, when you think about those two examples, right, well, net new customers, and then I have business revenue, and you say, well, both of those are important for me. One of the things that you want to do as you begin to standardize your business case is say, well, yes, those are both important for me, but one is more important than the other. So maybe net new customers is twice as important as revenue for me for the first 18 months, whatever the case may be, and build that into your business case that you say, yes, they're both important, but I'm going to put more value toward new customers and a portion of value toward revenue. And so you build that out into your business case. Obviously, you want to consider things like what are my development costs? What are my operational costs going to be? And then compare that to and treat that just like you would any startup organization from a business case perspective. So where you can go in and you can say, yes, we're going to do a net new, or we're going to augment a workload with Gen AI, and it's going to require an investment of, say, $350,000. But the net gain from a business opportunity perspective over the next 3 years, is $1.8 million. Okay, well, that makes sense, right? You can go and you can have that conversation with decision makers, stakeholders, your teams, and say, we are doing this, really because it makes sense from a business perspective. Key takeaway here is don't only focus on cost and the actual implementation and or cost savings, but ensure that you have quantified and defined what the business opportunities are going to be for each one of those use cases so that you begin to prioritize those and understand which ones that you do want to invest on from an organization, right? So we start out, we have a whole bunch of use cases. We filter those use cases down to the ones that make sense for our vertical, our business drivers, the themes of our organization. We're going to go into a bit more detail from a business case perspective on the ones that float to the top. We're going to understand what our costs is, what our timelines are, where we're at on a break-even perspective, right? And once you have that and you've determined the direction that you want to go, really the next step is kind of how are you going to get there, right? The implementation details. What is my architecture going to look like? What is my data ops going to look like, right? Once again, recurring theme. Make sure that you're standardizing on your architectures. If you're in an organization and you've got dozens of Gen AI initiatives going on or dozens of teams that want to implement that, that let's not recreate the wheel over and over again, right? We want some standardized templates. We want some standardized processes to really go in and say, okay, this is going to be our virtual assistant architecture. This is going to be our fine-tuned model architecture or our RAG architecture, right? Codify those architectures, codify all of your best practices around the Gen AI use cases that make sense. And then obviously, automation as much as possible. And so when we think about this, we tend to gravitate toward platform engineering. And so we're working our way kind of through those buckets that we talk about. This is that area where we're talking about golden paths. We want to be able to have some beginning templates to start out with, because as you look at something like a RAG architecture, right? This is kind of some of the benefits of the RAG architecture. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. This is an augmented retrieval architecture, but when you look at it from a platform perspective, this is a non-trivial implementation to get Gen AI from a RAG perspective implemented for one of your teams. So if you are doing this, even just for a dev, QA, and a prod environment, more or less, if you're doing this for any number of teams within the organization, you're going to want to standardize. You want to get this approved through your governance and security one time. You're going to want to build it, make sure that it works, make sure that it's secure, and that it meets the need one time, and then utilize that over and over again within the organization, right? Once again, to accelerate and get past that POC point that so many customers struggle with. Because if you've got 6 teams out there building a RAG architecture, the probability of them all looking the same is pretty unlikely. And then you've got 6 times the work, 6 times the approvals, 6 times the maintenance overhead, etc. And so this is really where kind of the implementations of Gen AI begin to go into platform engineering. So platform engineering, call it a maturation from a DevOps perspective, call it a focus of patterns and practices within a specific DevOps implementation. It's really about a strategic approach to accelerating implementations, improving our developer experience, so that getting to a Gen AI implementation quickly so that we can get that value for the business is really a frictionless experience for our teams and for the organization as a whole. When you think about platform engineering, generally that gravitates to something like a catalog, a template library. And so once again, you want to be able to build out those templates, those accelerators that are going to help your teams. It's going to reduce the complexity. It's going to reduce the risk. You think about a fully governed, versioned, approved template that you can simply hand over to a team, or they can consume through a self-service portal like you see here, to get them from that POC stage to a production-ready stage and recouping the value of that investment as quickly as possible. These templates should include lots of things. So think about it as much, much more than just the infrastructure as code. As important as the infrastructure as code pieces are, you need to have your IAC out there. You need to have deployment pipelines with that, not only for the delivery and deployment of the infrastructure itself, but of the Gen AI workload that you're going to layer on top of that. And so when you think about building and standardizing of these templates, architectures need to be there. Deployment pipelines need to be there. Delivery pipelines for the workloads need to be there. Establish what your security, your RBAC, your policies are for that platform so that the team that is going to consume it doesn't have to? What does it look like from an HADR perspective? Maybe that's literally just a flag within your template. So I go in, I say, well, yeah, you bet. I want that RAG architecture. That is exactly what I need to achieve my business goals. But I needed to be in 2 regions, or I needed to be, an SLA of this or that. And so make sure as you're building out these templates, as you're getting them approved to your governance, security, compliance needs, that you're also building in the HA pieces in it. One of the things that we include as part of our templates is, call it a modernization, call it a starter backlog, right? So I'm giving a team all of these artifacts that they need in order to get GenAI up and going as quickly as possible. It's completely governed, but I can't just give them all of the pieces and parts, right? I need to give them the steps of what to do next. And so think about including starter backlogs as part of your templates. So yes, I have all of my pieces and parts in my building blocks, and I have a cut sheet. I know exactly what I'm going to do next as far as delivering this workload out to my organization and driving that value with it. So once you get to that implementation stage, we touched on the fact that you need to consider skilling for your team. So keep in mind that as we move to generative AI, platform services are different. The way that we look at data is a bit different. Skilling and training for your team. How do we empower them? How do we enable them to be successful? So there are very technical implementations that we can do. Don't forget kind of that human aspect of your team. Don't just give them the nuclear reactor and say, hey, go figure out how to run it. You need to be able to give them, coaching, guiding, mentoring, training as it relates to a Gen AI experience. And then once that's out in production, make sure that we have very clearly defined KPIs that we want to reach. Our expectation, which we defined as part of our business case. How close are we to that? Is there a delta between that and what I'm achieving? Is it better? Is it worse? Maybe that is information that I can utilize to go back and actually put into another use case from a GenAI perspective that I have still coming down the pipe. Keep in mind that this is a journey, right? We are at the beginnings of this Gen AI revolution. It is going to be with us for many, many, many years, and things will move, things will change, patterns will adopt, they'll mature. You're not going to get there overnight, but you definitely can accelerate the adoption of Gen AI within your organization and the value that drives by really kind of focusing on a lot of the data points that we talked about today, right? Clearly define what your process is. Understand the juxtaposition between the technical implementation and the business value. Prioritize those that are going to drive more value for the organization. And then when it comes to implementation, make sure that your teams have everything that they need to be successful. Get them past that POC point, get them driving value for the business, and then do your checkups once you get to that production stage. So appreciate you all taking the time. I do want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. And so with that, if there are questions, we'll have the Q&A session. I can jump back and forth between slides or however you want to go from here.
Sounds good. Just want to remind everybody, we do have the meeting chat open if you want to use that. I know at least one person used the Q&A feature, asking a question along the way, and we were able to answer that in the Q&A, so that's great. And then also, if anybody wants to just use the hand raised feature to ask a question live, we can get you unmuted to be able to do it that way. So feel free if you have any questions. Use one of those many channels available.
And the first person is the hero, because as soon as one person asks a question, everybody will. So who's going to be the icebreaker today?
I was hoping reminding everyone of the different ways that they could ask their question might buy enough time for that icebreaker to get out their pick.
Are the things that we talked about today, did they resonate with kind of where you're at in your journey? I imagine that individuals are in different places, but does it make sense? Can you say, well, I'm here and oh, I forgot to do that, or oh no, we're just knocking it out of the park?
All right, we did get a question in through the Q&A. If you want to answer it from there, I'll be happy to read it out loud. So Camila, thank you, asks, what is the hardest part of shifting people's minds in this way?
I think if you look back to call them groundbreaking trends within the industry, there's always a challenge or hurdle as we go to a new plateau. I think that shift we're seeing with Gen AI. Now, you can argue there's a lot of similarities, right? You have to build that conversation on what we've done in the past. So whereas Gen AI may be relatively new, AI and ML, chatbots, those types of things have been around for a while. And so just having the conversation with the teams and saying, yeah, it's net new, right? But it's not a whole lot net new than anything else you've been doing. So take the same approach. We'll learn it. We're going to get training. We're going to do this to ensure that you're successful. And so, I really think it's a conversation of just the fear of the unknown is probably greater than the unknown. Lots of new words too, right? Like vector-based analysis and cosine, all those fun ones that we knew from calculus. Other questions? Does that help?
Getting a couple thumbs up there.
Okay.
Well, feel free, everyone, to keep asking questions in the chat or through any of the channels that I mentioned before. I am just going to grab the presentation item here. We can switch back as needed to support questions, but this is part of a monthly webinar series that we do for the Intelligent App Chronicles. So we have a session coming up in April, topic pending on that, but for those who have been following along, I know you've heard some of the things that are potentially up there around semantic kernel, around some other tools, and also around some of the processes involved in delivering intelligent applications in your organization. As mentioned in response to one of the questions in the Q&A, the recording of this is going to be made available, as well as the slides posted out to the blog post that originally announced this. I'm going to drop that blog post into chat for you so you have it easily at hand as you want to be able to get to those things. It takes us a little while to get the artifacts posted out there, but that's what we have there. So, I'm not seeing any more questions. I think Alex and Chris, you had a couple more things to steal back the screen share for. So, yep.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go ahead and grab that real quick. Just kind of some takeaways here in terms of what next steps would be. And so, kind of the point today is, we really want to get past the POC phases of all this and get into actually picking something to work with. And so kind of what our offer to you is that we'll help you do that and get you more of a hands-on environment to work with these things. And, let's get a pilot going on an actual use case that makes sense for your business. What we're going to do, obviously, and hope we've demonstrated in this presentation, is that we're going to take you down that journey with best practices and with a lot of thought behind this beyond just the general kind of, as Alex would put it, the John Wayne version of doing these things. So just leave you with that. Again, like what Matt said, we will be providing you with the slide deck as well as some additional information. As part of this offer we're giving you as well, we are qualified for all the Microsoft funding programs, and those do expire here in a couple months. So time is of the essence if we want to get rolling. So with that, I'll leave it back to you.
We did get one additional question in chat right at the end of me transitioning back to you. So Nitin asked, one question I have is how we can demonstrate ROI from a cost perspective.
So remember, we talked about putting business opportunities. So there is a let's get business opportunity in the business case and really understand in detail what that is. And what we mean by that is saying, well, if we do, let's go down the virtual assistant route because that's probably a pretty low hanging fruit path. If we go down the virtual assistant path internally, let's say, we're going to save 20% of our help desk time per person over a year, whatever. And then you quantify what your FTE is and you do that, right? So that's kind of the shot across the bow, which is we believe that we're going to achieve this ROI for the business. And this is one of the things where we see clients maybe misstepping. In order to go back in 3 months and say, yes, we achieved the value, you need the metrics at the beginning also, right? And so you can very clearly say, we went from a call time of this or this number of calls a day, and now we're here. We've decreased this by 30%. We've done this by a given percentage. And so there is very much an aspect of defining what the expectation is, understanding the KPIs that you need to grab, making sure that you grab those APIs to begin with so that you can show the delta a few months in. Does that help, Nitin? Excellent.
Right. We got yes, thank you back in the chat.
Okay. Others? Lots of good use cases out there too, right? You can go out, surf the web, find some good use cases, Gartner, PwC, those types of scenarios, or the Big Four consulting that will give you some ROI to start out with if you need it a little bit sooner than maybe your implementation.
Great. Well, we can wait just another minute here, give people an opportunity to get their questions in as they still have them. Shelley also posted in the background the way to be able to contact all of the presenters and hosts from today's meeting. So if you have questions that you didn't want to ask in front of a larger group like this, you have kind of that direct connect contact to be able to reach out to any one of us. Also in there is a link to the app series. So if there are previous sessions you wanted to go back and check out, see what some of the other topics are that we've covered, or perhaps you want to get latest and greatest on our next session, you have that link available to you as well at aka.ms/apt-series. And with that, I think the faucet of questions is turning off at this point. So I think we can call it there. Thanks so much, Chris, Alex, and the whole InCycle team, and the other folks at Microsoft who helped check in with you and making sure that we had the right kind of content to support the app series. Really appreciate your investment of time here. And thanks to all the attendees who were able to make it as well. Look forward to seeing you at another App Chronicles. Thanks all.
Thank you all.